Hello, I'm Kevin, Senior Horticulturalist here at the Greenery Garden Home in Heidelberg. And today's topic is on soil preparations for new plantings in the garden and what to do with existing garden soils when you're putting plants into the garden as well. So let's get started. One of the most important things to consider before planting anything into gardens, be it existing or new plantings, is the soil that they're going into. Often with new garden beds or new plantings where the soil has never been used before for any type of planting, the soils are generally needing some sort of conditioning. It's particularly important in Melbourne to make sure that drainage is adequate for any new plants or trees that might be going into a garden bed. Melbourne soils are generally clay-based soils and can cause problems with water holding through particularly wet winter months and not allowing the water to pass through the soil and having issues with plants where the roots are affected by overwatering or damp soils and the roots rot off, and quite often the plants fail as a result. So it's worth considering the layout of the garden initially. You need to ensure that you don't have those drainage issues, particularly on heavy clay soils. One way of avoiding that is, and particularly if you're constructing a new garden, make sure that the gardens are elevated above clay, and essentially the clay becomes the subsoil, and then you can introduce new, better quality soils above the clay and plant into those. Those new soils allow the water to pass through, hit the clay subsoil and run off. So you haven't got the problem of the plants continuously sitting in wet conditions and invariably suffering and dying back as a result. One way of doing that is to plant into a raised garden bed. The one I'm sitting on here is actually a vegetable garden, but it can be applied to varying situations in the garden. This one's actually made out of sleeper timber. It doesn't have to be sleepers, it can be whatever suits the style of garden that you may be constructing. The aim is to raise the garden bed up, have a good depth of decent soil, and then the plants will grow successfully in that and get off to a good start. Avoiding heavy clay soils. If the plant is put into a hole that's been dug into clay, quite often it creates a bucket effect. The water can't drain out of the bucket, it backfills in the hole, and invariably the plant drowns because the water can't get out of the hole. So it's very important to consider drainage when you're initially constructing the garden. So how do you improve soils for existing garden beds where you may have plants already in the garden, and some of those plants may be quite large and have extensive root systems, which make it a bit more difficult when you're putting new plants into the soil, the roots obviously being in the way. The soil might be a little bit impoverished because of those surrounding plants. What sort of things can you do to help improve those soils? And I'll run through with you a few of those things that you can do to help improve your soil. So I've got a few products here that we recommend for new plants going into any garden soils. Remembering that the better the soil, the better the plants are going to perform in the long run. So spending a bit of time initially improving soils is going to reap benefits for your garden later on. And a couple of examples here. Organic matter of any type is beneficial for mixing through soils. So if, for instance, you were digging a hole for a new plant, you've been down to the Greenery Garden Home, you've got yourself a selection of plants or a plant that you're wanting to put into the garden, what do you do to improve the soil? This is a product called Zoo Grow. It's actually a mixture of animal manures, and any sort of organic matter, doesn't matter what it is going to help improve your soil. So this would be incorporated with the soil that comes out of the hole when you're digging the hole for the plant. Generally about a 50-50 mixture, so existing soil with the manure, and then that's applied around the plant root ball when you put the plant into the ground. It just helps to condition that existing soil. It gets some organic matter into the soil. That helps the roots to establish when you've come to putting the plant in the ground and the plant's getting a bit of a growth spurt on it. So this is the product called gypsum. Gypsum is a clay breaker. It's normally applied at planting time or prior to planting the gardens, and it needs to be incorporated with some form of organic matter to work successfully in long term. Gypsum on its own won't do a lot. The soil often reverts back to how it was prior to the gypsum going on if it's not mixed with another product. So normally a combination of gypsum, some form of organic matter like a animal manure or compost is going to help with the soil conditioning. Neither of these products are going to damage the root system of the plants. There's often questions asked whether gypsum is safe to use around new plantings. Yes, it is. It doesn't affect the pH of the soil. It's just designed to help break down some of those heavier clay soils. It's also worth adding at planting time some sort of fertiliser, just a general garden fertiliser. Here we've got the all-purpose plant food, which as the name suggests is suitable for any plants that might be going into the ground. Fertiliser helps to stimulate root growth and helps to establish the plants more quickly. So always add a bit of fertiliser. Always ensure that you water the fertiliser in after it's applied. When planting in the garden, always remember to dig the hole roughly twice the size of the diameter of the pot that the plant's coming out of, and a little bit deeper than the depth of the pot as well. If the hole, particularly if it's a heavier type soil, is too small, new roots growing out of the root ball from the plant are affected and may not be able to penetrate the soil surrounding it. So good idea to give it a bit more room around the outside of the root ball. A loose, friable soil helps the plant to establish better. If you're planting into soils that are prone to drying out quickly, there are wetting agents which you can put in at the same time as put the plants in the ground. This is a product called Rapid Soak. So it helps to encourage water into the soil around the root system of the plant rather than the water running off the top of the soil if the soil's dry. In those sort of cases, we'd always recommend watering the soil well prior to planting. That may be a day or two prior to the day that you're wanting to plant. Moist soils are better and help the plants establish better. If you're planting into dry soils, it's often hard to wet the soils and get the plants established properly. So the addition of something like Rapid Soak as a soil wetter helps to get the water down to the root system where it's needed. When your planting is complete, we'd always suggest using some sort of mulch on the garden bed. If you need to save yourself a lot of work, mulching will do that for you. It helps to retain moisture in the summer. It tends to suppress weeds. If you've got those gardens where you're getting loads and loads of weeds coming through all the time, using a mulch around the plants helps to keep those weeds down. Keeps the roots cool through those hotter summer days, and it reduces evaporation from the soil as well. So, keeps the temperatures, reasonably good around the plants, so they get off to a good start. Save yourself some work and use some mulches as well after planting. I'd just like to reiterate about the importance of good drainage for any new plant going into a garden bed. Melbourne soils often tend to be very heavy clay type soils. And if you're unsure, one of the best ways to test the soil is to dig a hole where you're intending to plant the plant, filling it with water and timing how long it takes for the water to drain out of the hole. If it's any more than half an hour, then the soil will need some sort of conditioning prior to planting. If it's longer than that half hour, the water tends to sit in the hole and you'll get poor results later on when you come to put the plant in the ground. So ensure that the water can drain away from the root system of the plant, regardless of the type of plant you're putting in the garden, and you'll get much better results in the long term. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and don't forget, if you've got more queries or questions on how to improve the soil at planting time, feel free to ask any of our qualified staff here at the Greenery Garden Home. We'd only be too happy to help you. Don't forget to subscribe if you have enjoyed the video, and remember that we're open 6.5 days a week, and we can help you with any queries that you might have. Thanks for watching.